Engaging with our complicated past helps us understand there is no them, there's only us, even when we disagree and are divided. For nearly 50 years, my films have explored American stories. I'm honored to announce that I will return to Gettysburg with my colleagues for a festival of screenings, conversations, and events that look at where we've been, where we are, and most important, of course, where we are going.
The Gettysburg Film Festival is April 5th, 6th, and 7th. For the full schedule and tickets, go to gettysburgfilmfestival.org.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
Are you ready for your next great Civil War read? Then try the new historical novel, The Heavens Falling, by Jonathan Lucci. Follow the members of the Dawson family through the Civil War, from the halls of Congress to the bloody fields of battle, and from the decks of gunboats to the solitude of Lincoln's office. The Heavens Falling is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or visit theheavensfalling.com to order. That's theheavensfalling.com.
Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit Bantam Roasters, formerly 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house, and they have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your trip. Visit them at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options for all of their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order in the cafe.
Hi, this is Bruce Boxleitner, and you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we are finalizing our series with Matt Borders. Matt, 2023 is over.
Just about, yeah.
I mean, good golly, Miss Molly, I can't believe...
I can't believe how fast this year went.
It really did go fast. And it was, for me at least, it was an action-packed year. How was it for you?
Similar, yeah. It was a very busy year for me, for our show, and everything else.
Your show being the History Things podcast with Pat McGuire and you. And you guys have been doing a lot. You recently did a cooking show, which I really, really liked because I wanted to do the same thing with the same guest, but you beat me to it. But you had the better kitchen for it anyway, so it worked.
Well, definitely have her on because Cooking with First Ladies is a fantastic show, and Sarah's got a lot of knowledge. You
know what she's doing? She's sending me 3 of her favorite baked goods.
Oh, good.
And I'm going to do a taste test with them as she describes them because she can't be here, so we're going to, So that's what we're going to do. All right. Anyway, so, yes, we have done, 61?
Yep.
62, 63.
That was the
18, 61, 62, 63. History of the Army of the Potomac. That's what we're doing today for those of you who didn't read the title. And so today we're doing 64 and 65. We're taking 65 up to May, the Grand Review.
Correct.
And but 64 is an action-packed year.
It is.
To say the least.
To say the least is right. It is the last full year of the war. It is the most intense period of the war, the bloodiest period of the war. And honestly...
Which is hard to imagine, by the way, the bloodiest period. Like, it's been so miserably bloody up until this point.
Right.
You have, for the Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, Second Manassas, Antietam, these terrible... I wasn't going in chronological order there, just as they came to mind.
I wasn't going to call you that.
Thank you. These terrible battles that, were just like... historic in the sense of just the casualty rate and the bloodiness of it all. And then now you've got a whole other year coming up, which is even worse.
Right.
How does this happen, Matt Borders?
Mostly due to the intensity of it. The fact of the matter is that in many of the campaigns we've seen up to this point of the war, there is a break between the campaigns. There's this period of downtime, drawing a breath, if you will, rebuilding the armies and going at it again on either the same or different objectives. In 64, it's bam, 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 bam. And it does not stop. Even with the siege itself, the siege of Petersburg and Richmond, the longest siege of the war, it doesn't stop because on a, quote, quiet day, you still have what a later war would refer to as wastage. The shooting, the bombardments, the things that are still taking men off the lines, the sickness that goes through the lines as well, of course. So it does not stop in 64. It just keeps going. And we're going to see the results of that. We're going to see some real cracks form in some of the best and hardest fighting units of the Army of the Potomac because, in large part, due to the amount of time they've already been in and the intensity of the fighting that would occur.
So, like, you had mentioned before where, say winter comes and you go into winter quarters and everything like that. Winter of 63, do they go into, end of 63, do they go into winter quarters like they would traditionally do?
Yes.
And then when 64 begins, is it different now or does it change when does Grant come east?
So I think this is a great segue move into
Thank you very much.
To move into our focus for the show today. So, as we did with the previous episodes, here's a quote that kind of sets the theme. Lee's army will be your objective point. Wherever Lee goes, there you will go also. Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant to Major General George G. Meade. And that's at the beginning of the Overland campaign. To answer your question, though, Matt, let's see. 1864 is going to begin as a recruiting year for both sides. Remember how we talked about 1862 and during the Peninsula Campaign, everything was going great, and so the new Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, just decided to shut down the recruiting offices?
Right.
And then that becomes a huge issue for not only the rest of the year, well, it's still an issue.
Okay.
So we've got, in both the North and the South, we have movements towards getting more troops, but there's a real desire to avoid an additional draft. We saw what happened with the draft in 63 for the Army of the Potomac and, of course, other federal armies. Was not well received. So Lincoln is really supporting the idea of bounties. Now, bounties have been a thing since the war began, but the federal government's really backing the bounty system at this point. They're also going to be doing not only cash bounties, but even some land grant bounties, which we haven't seen before for this war. But it was a big thing for previous American conflicts. Actually, one of the reasons why my family was originally in Kentucky is thought to be a land grant from the War of 1812.
And there was a border dispute, and then they changed the name to Borders.
Right?
There
you go.
Is that how it went?
I actually do not know, but it has been speculated.
Has it really?
We've joked about where the name may have come from. It's English in origin. But
Okay.
Now, what's going to happen is that we would actually see in the Army of Northern Virginia. The Army of Northern Virginia, to make a bad joke, has been very impressive so far, but now they are going to begin impressing people.
Oh, that's
bad joke.
Pretty lame. Yeah.
Thank you. But yes, there is going to be some impressment beginning with the Army of Northern Virginia just to get troops in there, and the Confederate government is actually going to see to this as well. By February, we're going to have what's derisively referred to as the Cradle to Grave Act that is passed in the Confederate Congress, which would basically do away with all the loopholes in their own what's the term I'm looking for? Their own, not impressment system, but the
selective service?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, the Confederate version of the selective service, their own draft system.
Okay.
There was all these holes in it. Okay. If you owned so much money, if you owned so many people, so forth and so on, you didn't have to go.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Right. So, apparently. And so they were exempt. Not anymore.
Okay.
And now they're drafting everyone from 17 to 50.
Oh.
So that's
they're getting desperate.
Right. And so
like
that's
at the
why
end of World War II in Germany. Yeah.
So that's why it's being referred to in the papers as the Cradle to Grave Act.
Okay.
Also during this period, though, January 11th saw the 13th Amendment being proposed in the U.S. Senate, so there's some good things happening there. The new year also came in with a new rank in the United States military. The rank of Lieutenant General was revived on February 24th And just 7 days later, March 2nd, Ulysses S. Grant was confirmed as Lieutenant General, with his official commission being set on March 9th.
Now, you say revived.
Correct.
Last person to hold it was?
Winfield Scott, as a brevet rank.
Aha. So, okay, now there's a lot of confusion, though. Because what happened with Grant recently? Didn't they recently make him, like, super duper full general or something like that?
Right. So what happened, and first off, there was
and that's not technically the rank.
There were two people that had lieutenant general before Grant. Washington, because he's always the highest ranking officer in the Army, period, and still is to this day. And then as a brevet promotion, as a brevet thank you, basically Winfield Scott got it.
So it was Washington that I'm thinking of then that was posthumously promoted because he has to have the highest.
Right. Washington was, but Grant was too.
Okay.
Grant over, if it wasn't this summer, it was a couple of summers ago during closer the World War I centennial. Grant did receive the honorarium General of the Armies.
Okay.
Because we only had, I think, 3, which was Washington, Eisenhower, and Pershing.
Okay.
And basically there was a lot of scholars and folks within the military community who said, well, what about the guy who
won the war? Yeah.
And he was commanding multiple armies. He should have this rank of General of the Armies. And that's what they did with Grant.
But was that not his rank?
He is.
Well, I mean, he was a lieutenant general with the position of General of the Armies. Okay.
General in Chief.
General in Chief.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So he is the most senior general.
And his position, not his rank, but his position was essentially what Halleck's was, right?
Correct.
And the difference was Grant says, I'm not sitting at a desk in D.C. I'm going out with the Army of the Potomac and I'm
But I need somebody in D.C. to deal with the logistics, to deal with the politics. And so Henry Halleck is retained as essentially the chief of staff. That's what we would refer to him today.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so he's going to be the guy in Washington while Grant, as you said, Matt, goes out into the field. He chooses to make his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. Now, he is not technically in command of the Army of the Potomac. Right. That was something that really confused me as a young man.
Right. Me too.
And we see this all the time with especially new readers and new researchers to the Civil War. Well, Grant takes over the Army of the Potomac. Technically, no, but he is the big boss, and he is also there.
Like, you can understand why someone would make that mistake.
Exactly.
Because you never hear about Meade.
Right.
And Lee surrenders to Grant.
Right.
Doesn't surrender to Meade.
Right.
Surrenders to Grant.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how people can make that honest mistake, especially kids.
And it is an honest mistake.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, there's something wrong with it after you listen to this show and you still make that mistake.
In the factual sense.
Oh, yes. Okay.
The technically correct, the best kind of correct. Now,
technically... Go ahead.
I thought you were going to take it up, too.
No, that was it.
Now, when it comes to Grant and Meade, they initially get along very, very well. And you've had some really good authors on this show who have touched on Meade's legacy and kind of his rebuilding of his legacy, especially over the last few years. And this is the part that oftentimes got overshadowed until these more recent researchers and authors have come along. The fact of the matter is that there's not, at least initially, any bitterness between, or at least no apparent bitterness between George Gordon Meade, the snapping turtle himself, and Grant. Now, what's interesting is that their staffs don't like each other. And that's going to cause problems. Okay.
You know, that's funny. It kind of reminds me of the so-called blood feud between me and the Jim Hessler and Eric Lindblade's podcast. We don't have it personally, but the audiences did, and it's weird.
I just get the idea of the three of you going down the street.
And that's exactly the type of brawl it would be. It was, when you're a jet, you're... Yeah. No, but so Now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, well, we were talking about Grant and Meade and their kind of rehabilitation that's been going on lately,
right?
Which I think is well deserved. But it kind of before the show started, we were talking about this book I'm reading or I'm listening to on Audible about the Lost Cause, the myth of the Lost Cause. It's a collection of essays, and this is the first time I've delved into what is the lost cause. Like I hear from historians all the time and they go, well, that's a lost cause thing. And I've been able to piece together what the lost cause is, but I never took a course on it, never read a book on it. I've just kind of through osmosis understood what it is. And so now I'm actually reading about how it all came about, and it is so disturbing to me. And I realized just how pervasive it was. It got into everything, even in the North, and the Northern people fell for it too. And
that's why Grant is still seen by many circles, even in the North, as a drunk or butcher.
Right,
and
or a drunken butcher. And that was the point. Was that one of the points that this person made in this one essay? I think it was Gary Gallagher's essay I was listening to, and he said, he was going through all the different Civil War publications, and this was done in the 90s, so it was current then. And all of the advertisements they had for busts and statues and paintings and things like that. And if there were 10 of them, 9 of them were Lee, 1 was Grant.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it was just down the line. Every single one of them had these just skewed ratios like that, and Jackson and all that.
Oh, and that's not even a 90s thing. I mean, I was busting the chops of a acquaintance and a friend who runs a hobby shop in Frederick, Maryland. And he had all of the prints and stuff like that. And most of them are Confederate, or all the Confederate ones are forward. And I'm like, come on now. Maryland's a border state. Yeah, but it's got a lot more guys in the federal service. He's like, I know, but the Confederate stuff sells.
Yeah, it's so mind-boggling to me. But we got into, I said, like Americans are really good at coming together and deciding we're going to defeat this, whatever this is. In the case of the Civil War, it's the rebellion.
Right.
We're going to defeat this. And they didn't really, they were all arguing amongst themselves. It wasn't everybody was all together, but you know what I mean? Like in the simplicity's sake. And they do it, they defeat it, they kick ass eventually, and then win, and then they go, I'm done, move on. And then who writes the history? But it's the losers. Every one of our wars, except for maybe the Germans, the losers write the history, right? And then we end up being the bad guys because we won.
Right, and maybe not for the revolution. We've got a whole lot of mythology tied into the revolution.
Well, we don't listen to them. They're British. Yeah, that's the one enemy that we're like, yeah, we don't care what you say. And everybody else, we go, oh, yeah, you're right. We were terrible. But I just think it's weird that, Grant and Meade, especially Meade, because nobody knows Meade.
Right.
Right. Unless you're a Gettysburg student, nobody knows Meade.
Well, and Meade brought that on himself too, in a lot of ways, because of his distaste for newspapermen. He wasn't getting his name in the papers.
Yeah.
He wasn't giving interviews and things like that. So he didn't have he was a military man, and he didn't have a whole lot of political backers either. And so between not having your politics and not having, we would say today, not having politics in the military, that's a good thing. And that was a good thing back then, but you didn't have anybody to really promote you in the halls of Congress.
It didn't really help, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, of course, his distaste for, much like Sherman, the distaste for the newspapermen didn't help either. And it encouraged them to write more negative or to focus on Grant and his boys.
So, all right, so Grant comes east. And he's in charge, and he leaves Halleck in Washington to run logistics. And he says to Meade, where Lee goes, you go.
Right.
Okay. So what is the reaction of soldiers in the Army of the Potomac to this new commander?
Initially, they don't know what to think of him. Okay. It's another commander. Okay, we've still got Meade. That's great. But now we understand there's an even bigger Whig that's there at headquarters. So how's that going to react?
Right, because this is new.
Right.
The guy above the Army commander is in the field with you.
Exactly.
So now this is this other layer of leadership that's kind of like, what the hell?
Right. And the troops are basically you've seen how many changes in command the Army of the Potomac has had up until this point. The troops themselves take it in stride. They're not necessarily impressed by what they're seeing in Grant. I mean, he's a little bit shorter. He's a little bit stockier. He's not really big into the dress and pomp.
The pomp and circumstance,
exactly, of the war. But I think there's a reality to that the troops appreciate, even from the beginning. They're like, yeah, he doesn't look like much, but let's see what he can do.
Is he? What's the morale of the Army when he takes over?
Right. So the morale in the Army of the Potomac in the spring of 1864 is actually pretty good. So there's been this attempt to revitalize it in the sense of manpower. We've had a lot of the a lot of the 3-year regiments have begun to muster out. The 2-year regiments are gone at this point. So we've had a lot of the 3 years mustering out. We've had a lot of the 3 years re-enlisting too. Okay, so the overall feel within the Army is actually pretty good. Now, what's interesting is that it's really, really big too. The Army of the Potomac in 1864, when it steps off on the Overland campaign on May 4th, is clocking in at about 120,000 men.
Okay, so it's big.
It is big. What's interesting about that is and a colleague of mine pointed this out to me just the other night, about 30 to 40,000 of those troops are brand new.
Brand new, meaning recently recruited or sucked out of the forts?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
These are mostly new regiments, not even sucked out of the forts in many cases.
So these are green troops.
Right. And these are the big 3-digit regiments coming out of Pennsylvania and New York.
Like this 891st Pennsylvania.
Right, exactly. I think both New York and Pennsylvania get into the 200s with some of their regiments. And we're seeing those high hundreds and even the lower twos now getting into the Army.
Well, let's go into this for a second here, because when recruits came in in the Army of the Northern Armies, they would make a whole new regiment. Is that correct?
Generally, yes.
So they wouldn't put replacements in an existing regiment generally?
Generally. The existing regiments do have... and we talk about this in my books about guys getting, we lost track of them in the records, or they've been detailed home. Well, they've been detailed home in many cases to recruit. Now, how successful they are is debatable because you do have all of these new units being raised.
Okay.
So it's one thing to go home with your sergeant and maybe a lieutenant and be like, come on, son, join the famous 6th whatever. We did this, and this at these fights. We need more men to help finish the job. Versus your buddy who's just been made captain or lieutenant colonel or something like that, who's like, hey, Matt, come on. We're going to go in now. This thing's almost wrapped up. I'm going to get you a little bit of rank. How about some stripes, buddy?
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, okay.
So
would it be kind of lopsided as far as size of regiments go? Like the veteran regiments, like
Definitely.
down to 30 men?
Definitely.
And the new one's got 1,000?
Right. I mean, you got to realize a regiment of 1,000 men is like a brigade at this point.
Right.
And that's not too much of an exaggeration.
No.
So, and we're even seeing that in later 62 in some cases. The Iron Brigade's got 800 guys at Antietam, for example. So, and that's the whole brigade. So to have these brand new regiments rolling in, they are commenting on it. I mean, they're giving them crap as anybody who's been in anything for a while versus the new guys does. New uniforms, brass buttons, wah.
Right. Yeah.
That sort of thing. But they are impressed by the size.
I was just watching the Replacements episode of Band of Brothers the other night, and it's an interesting dynamic between veterans and newbies.
And those newbies are going to earn their keep very fast.
Well, yeah. Oh, yes, they are. Now, why? Go ahead.
Well, because the Overland campaign is going to be so brutal and intense. And it's going to lead to more of these troop pulls, and the one that you were referencing, even pulling from the forts around Washington.
Now, when does this all begin? When does Grant takes over and immediately it's like get a moving, or
close but not quite? So Grant gets the rank lieutenant general and is made general in chief in March He's officially given his document by Abraham Lincoln on March 10th. I mean, he's commissioned on the 9th, and he gets the document on the 10th. And then he has the Army of the Potomac advancing by May 4th. So March, April, that's okay. I'm going to kind of get a feel for this thing. We're going to talk to Meade. We're going to get a plan. We're going to work with the other armies in the field, the Army of the James under Ben Butler. And, of course, we've got Franz Sigel in the Shenandoah. So he is trying to work with not only the armies, 3 armies now operating in Virginia at the same time, but he's also talking to his boy, Sherman, out there, with now commanding the Middle Mississippi Department, I believe it's called. But he's got an army group with him. He's got operations going on down in Louisiana, the Trans-Mississippi. The movements against Mobile Bay are beginning to turn. So there's a lot happening that Grant has to see to now that he is general-in-chief. But by May, the beginning of May, the Army of the Potomac is moving, and he is moving with it.
So he's coordinating all of these armies everywhere.
Correct.
And so that they're all working towards one end.
Right.
Right.
As Lincoln,
is this new to the war effort for the Union?
New-ish. Yes.
New-ish.
It's what the General-in-Chief was more or less supposed to be doing. Up until this point, the General-in-Chief has been putting out the idea of the war and how they wanted to coordinate, making sure people got supplied, things of that nature. But there is a more dedicated effort to having everybody coordinate with one another. As Lincoln would joke, those not skinning, meaning those not fighting, can hold a leg. Okay? So that even if your army is not actively engaged, you are in their face so that they can't shift troops to another front, which is exactly what's been happening. The Confederacy has interior lines. Now, their railroad system sucks, so it hasn't helped them beyond the pale, but the fact of the matter is the Confederacy does have interior lines. They have shifted troops around pretty darn well over the course of the war, and this new effort by Grant and the armies in the field is not going to allow them to do that to nearly the extent they have done.
Hold them by the nose, kick them in the pants.
There you go.
There you go. All right, so he gets the armies moving. Let's get some fighting in here.
So let's get some fighting in here. The Army steps off on May 4th. The fighting in the Battle of the Wilderness begins on May 5th.
Okay. So not very long into moving.
Exactly.
Boom.
Exactly. So they're going to cross the Rapidan. They're going to go into the Wilderness. The Wilderness, for those of you, I know your listeners are very well versed on the war, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Wilderness in Northern Virginia, it is a second to third generation hellscape of trees. Okay. Generations before this, the whole region had been basically clear cut to feed the furnaces.
Right.
So Catherine's Furnace, all of these other smelteries and furnaces that are down there for charcoal furnaces for the most part. All those old trees are gone. Okay. All of this second and third growth has come in, and it's extremely dense. Okay. We saw this during the Chancellorsville campaign because it's the same territory. You got to use the roads. Or if you're not on the roads, you're going to be hacking and fighting your way through that crap. And this is the problem that the Army of the Potomac is going to have. Lee chooses to engage in this terrain to basically either bottle them up on the roads or null and void their numeric advantage because of the train. It's very smart. And it is a terrible place to fight, especially when it comes to linear warfare. Okay.
It's almost impossible.
Almost impossible. You're going to have some very intense fighting over those 2 days. We have a great quote by Grant as his forces are Meade's forces are beginning to engage there in the Wilderness. He's getting all of this unsolicited advice from Meade, or more specifically Meade's staff. And he basically says, I'm heartily tired of hearing about what Lee is going to do. Some of you always seem to think he is suddenly going to turn a double somersault and land in our rear on both flanks at the same time. Go back to your command and try to think what we're going to do ourselves instead of what Lee is going to do.
That's what I love about Grant. I love that attitude. That's the attitude everybody should take in life. You don't have to be in war to have that attitude. Don't worry about it with the other guy. Do your own thing. believe me, if I worried about what the other guy said about me, I would never do the show. You can't worry about that.
Right.
You got to just do it.
Yep, exactly.
Because at the end, all you have to answer to is yourself.
Right.
And so just go ahead and forget what the other guy's going to do.
Right.
So Grant is it's such a shame that he has been just kind of laughed at and written off in American history, even amongst Northerners, as, a drunken butcher, because he's so much more than a drunken butcher. He's a smart drunken butcher.
He's the winner of the war.
Yes, exactly.
Yep,
God.
He is. Now, Grant, though, to Meade and the Army of the Potomac's credit, Grant is shocked by the intensity of the fighting that will occur at the Wilderness. It is shocking. Over the 2 days of combat, you're going to see 17,000 casualties in the Army of the Potomac, alone. There are accounts of Grant after the first day breaking down. We're talking about a man who did not like the sight of blood. We're talking about a man who did feel for his soldiers. There's accounts of him breaking down after the first day's fighting because of the intensity and the losses that are being sustained. However, he's also, going back to your point, he is driven, and he is not going to give up on this. Now, one of the great diarists of the war is the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles, and he is going to write about the shock of the combat. He's going to write things along the lines of, I think General Grant has had his eyes opened to basically what's going on here in the East.
Yeah.
And he's got a choice to make at this point. He's just got punched in the mouth. Yeah, he's still got a numeric advantage, but he is caught in this extremely difficult terrain. He's got a Confederate force that's in front of him and is now beginning to dig in. He can withdraw back above the rapid, as so many officers before him have, or he can try to figure a way around it. This comes from a private in the 11th New York Artillery. This is Private Frank Wilkinson. He wrote, Grant's military standing with the enlisted men this day hung in the direction we turned at the Chancellorsville House. And he's referring as at the end of the second day. To the left, he was to be raided with Meade and Hooker and Burnside and Pope, the generals who preceded him. We turned to the right. Instantly, all of us heard a sigh of relief. Our spirits rose. We marched freely. The men began to sing. The enlisted men understood the flanking movement. That night, we were happy.
So they finally feel like they've got a man who wants to win this thing.
And keep pushing.
And keep going.
Yep.
Because we're not going to go back and lick our wounds and go, well, maybe we'll try this next time.
Right.
We're gonna keep on going.
Right, exactly.
Didn't work today, might work tomorrow.
Might work tomorrow. Just days later, 2 days later, we're engaged again. Spotsylvania Courthouse. One of the longest engagements of the Overland campaign from May 8th to the 21st, over 18,000 casualties just in the Army of the Potomac. Again, this is not
right.
These fights are going to be intense and continue for days on end. The North Anna River, May 23rd to 26th, 4,000 casualties. Totopotomac Creek on May 28th to the 30th, just over 700. Cold Harbor, the terrible bloodletting that occurs at Cold Harbor. We think of Cold Harbor for that one day, that one morning attack, but it's May 31st to May 12th, and there's over 13,000 during that period.
Jesus.
During this period as well, it's not just been Grant hammering at Lee. He's also been, again, working with the Army of the James, working with the troops out in the Shenandoah Valley, who just got walloped too at Newmarket. He's also working within his own command. He's brought people with him from the West. During this period is Yellow Tavern.
Yeah.
Phil Sheridan requests to go out after Jeb Stuart. This is Sheridan's raid and the Battle of Yellow Tavern, because he specifically requested to let me go get this guy. Let me go get his cavalry. Meade doesn't want him to.
Yeah.
He's seen what happens when the cavalry goes off on its own, and there's been some very good examples of federal cavalry going off on its own, trying to do its own thing, and then getting popped for it.
Right.
Grant says, let him go. And he does. And Jeb Stuart's mortally wounded at Yellow Tavern. Michigan Cavalier, too, by the way. But
so, real quick, and I just realized I should have brought this up in the lead up to all this.
Mm-hmm.
The makeup of the Army of the Potomac, it's different than what we know here at Gettysburg.
Yes, it is. Significantly so. We're missing 2 corps. So the 1st and 3rd Corps, they do exist into 1864, but not very much longer. They are going to be dissolved due to the tremendous casualties that they sustained, particularly at Gettysburg, but throughout 1863. So the 1st and 3rd are going to be merged with the 2nd and 5th primarily. There's also going to be a good chunk of the 3rd Corps that goes to the 6th Corps. Okay. So
we've lost the 11th and 12th after Gettysburg.
Correct. They are now in the Western Theater and by this point in the war, they've been merged together to make the 20th Corps.
So who is in the Army of the Potomac in 1864? What are the corps?
You've got the 2nd.
2nd, yeah.
You've got the 5th, the 6th, and the 9th.
The 9th.
And the 9th is technically independent for a while. Ambrose Burnside does outrank Meade, and so he is going directly to Grant. Now, that's not going to be in the entire 1864, but during the Overland campaign, he's kind of like, okay.
So he's like an independent command.
Right.
Sort of.
Within the confines.
Right. Okay, so it's fewer corps than we have at Gettysburg, but they've got they start with 120,000 men.
Right. They've been bulked up.
And the whole point though is that Grant has men to spare, which is a kind of
it sounds callous.
A callous way of saying it, but it is that's war.
Right.
He has men to spare. Lee doesn't.
Right.
So Grant can lose 14,000 men and pick up and say, move to the left or move to the right or do whatever.
Right.
Lee, he loses 3,000 men, and that's a tough one.
Right. That's bad news.
Yeah, and it's harder for him to chase after Grant and counter his moves, which is the whole point. Right. Okay.
So the Army of the Potomac, like we said at the beginning of this, about 120,000. Lee's got about half that. He's got 60 to 65,000 men. He is on the interior, he's on the defensive, so he does have that advantage. He's going to be needing to stay in front of Grant, though, because during all of this, he needs to keep Grant at bay, because even though Grant himself wants Lee to be the objective, he knows that the best way to draw Lee in is to do what, Matt? What does he need to threaten?
His flank. What? I'm sorry. I was.
You were
looking at the comments.
Doing technical things.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Give me the lead up again. I'm sorry. I want to answer this.
So Grant, he has told Meade that your objective is
Lee's army
and Lee's army, but Grant knows that the best way to draw Lee in is to threaten something else
with supplies or Richmond.
You're getting there. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. Richmond and Petersburg.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly right. So by continuously moving by the left flank ever further south, by coordinating with Ben Butler on the peninsula and with the Army of the James, they can threaten Richmond, the Confederate capital, and later, just a little bit later, Petersburg itself, Richmond's main supply depot.
Is there there has to be. Is there a force at Richmond while all this is going on?
Yeah, and it's mostly, at this point, it's commanded by George Pickett.
Oh, right.
Pickett is, dueling, for lack of a better term, with the Army of the James. A lot of people, maybe that's a topic for another day, honestly. The Army of the James is a fascinating little army in and of itself, has some really interesting characters in it beyond Ben Butler. They do some really good fighting, have the USCT down there that work very, very hard. It's often maligned as an army of amateurs or as this little sideshow to the big show. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, that's fair. Okay, it's a much smaller army than the Army of the Potomac, and it's dealing with very different objectives. But that's what's going on near Richmond, is that Ben Butler and the Army of the James is threatening Richmond.
Right.
And Pickett is squawking for more troops, and I need help. And Lee is going, what do you want me to send? It's not happening.
Right. I got nothing.
I got nothing because I got 120,000 Federals in my face.
Yeah.
So again, those not skinning can hold a leg.
Yeah. All right,
now, here's the quote I was looking for. this is actually from Robert E. Lee himself to Jubal Early on June 12th. We must destroy this army of Grant's before he gets to the James River. If he gets there, it will become a siege and then a mere question of time. It's a very famous quote. I know a lot of your listeners are familiar with it, but it is very, very true. If this becomes a siege around Richmond or Petersburg or both, as it will become, it's over.
Lee's got this hanging over his head, though, I think, through the whole war, because prior to Gettysburg, when he's trying to get, approval to come up here, ultimately what would be coming up here, he says, he's like, look, I need supplies, I need this stuff, this stuff. He goes, if we don't do this, if we don't do something bold like this, and I'm paraphrasing here, we're going to have to fall back on Richmond, and then it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, which is essentially what he says in 62
exactly,
as well.
Right. So he's always aware that it's just a matter of time. Like the Confederacy is really remarkable that they were able to prolong this war as long as they did and keep it going, because they were always on the brink of disaster.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a Union commander who could exploit it, recognize it and exploit it and get the troops there.
And even in 63, there's an attempt at Richmond. It's not a particularly well-known campaign, but Dix is down there. He's trying to figure out a way, and basically he keeps bumping up against Richmond's defenses in 63, and he's like, I don't really want to push it because I'm out here by myself. And so we don't hear much about it because everything's going on with Gettysburg, with Vicksburg, the Tullahoma, down there at Port Hudson. There's lots of other big things happening in 63.
Right.
But in regards to this campaign, this just constant boom, boom, blow after blow after blow, Grant's going to lose about 55,000 men in 40 days. Just horrendous casualties because he's got to keep pushing. Now, this is going to lead to a real public backlash in the papers, even in the Lincoln administration and the first family. Mary Lincoln is wailing through the White House that Grant is a butcher, that he has not a iota of care for human life, or something to that extent is what she says. Of course,
she's
Lincoln,
also nuts.
Depends on who you ask. And she's had a lot of tragedies.
Of course she has, yes.
Now, Lincoln, to his credit, would say famously, I cannot spare this man. He fights.
Right.
And that's what he wants. He wants somebody who's going to keep pressing this. Now, it is during this period that Lincoln is going to be renominated for the presidency. Of course, 1864 is an election year. On June 8th, Lincoln gets the official nomination as the candidate for president for the Republican Party. 8 days later, he's going to travel to Philadelphia to the Sanitary Commission Fair there, and he's going to address the crowd. I've got this little chunk of the speech here. I suppose that this toast is intended to open the way for me to say something. War at the best is terrible, and this of ours, in its magnitude and duration, is one of the most terrible the world has ever known. It has deranged business totally in many places, and perhaps all. It has destroyed property, destroyed life, and ruined homes. It has produced a national debt and a degree of taxation unprecedented in the history of this country. It has caused mourning among us until the heavens may almost be said to be hung in black. When is this war to end? I do not wish to name a day when it will end, lest the end should not come at the given time. We accepted this war. We did not begin it. We accepted it for an object, and when that object is accomplished, the war will end. And I hope to God we will never end until that object is accomplished. Now, Matt, you know as well as I that the war aims have changed by this point in the war. Lincoln is not just talking about the bringing the Union back together. He is talking about the destruction of slavery at this point as well. That I wanted to touch on that, though, because these casualties that are occurring are seeping into all aspects of of life here in the United States. Okay, everybody is reading the losses in the papers. This sanitary fair, the Sanitary Commission Fair, is specifically to raise money to aid the armies in the field, specifically the Army of the Potomac, because it's there in Philly, and so many of those federal troops are out of Pennsylvania. Interesting side note, Lincoln actually, I believe, auctions off one of the copies of the Gettysburg Address at this fair to help raise money.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Huh. Do we know where that is now?
I don't know. There's so many copies. Yeah. I don't know where that specific one is. Now, by June 14th, Grant has done what Lee has been trying to avoid. He has crossed the James. This is an expansive pontoon bridge. From June 15th to 18th, the Army of the Potomac would fight its first battle in front of Petersburg, known as the Battle of Petersburg. It's a failure to breach the inner defensive ring of forts, though they will gain some of the outer works, and would resulting in the beginning of the siege of Petersburg on June 18th. Now, due to this horrendous series of engagements that we have had during the Overland campaign, even as soon as after the first fight, that first 17,000 chunk of casualties after the Wilderness, Grant and a lot of the Army of the Potomac, of course, is like, whew, geez, we might need some more.
Right. Hold that thought, Matt. We'll take a break and be right back after these words.
Who can forget the sounds of the 60s?
The 1860s. I can't, and you can't either. Now, there's Marching Through Georgia, the exciting new album by Billy Webster. All of your favorite hits of the 1860s in one place. Such hits as Garry Owens, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, All Quiet Along the Potomac Tonight, Marching Through Georgia, and much, much more. So what are you waiting for? Go to billysongs.com and order your digital download of Billy Webster's Marching Through Georgia today. That's billysongs.com.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There, you'll find apparel, drinkware, decor, and more, featuring a wide range of subjects from the ancient world to the Cold War. Looking to make an impression with the perfect gift? Well, TR Historical now offers a vintage wrapping service for a truly unique presentation. And our listeners will save 15% when using promo code GBERG1863 at checkout. So go to trhistorical.com. TR Historical, for the love of history.
Movies and documentaries about history are spread out across the internet, and their quality is often suspect. History Fix delivers curated historic programming to your preferred device using their website or branded apps. Join History Fix for movies, documentaries, short films, and how-tos. Content covers historic eras ranging from the 1st to the 21st centuries. Their team of curators brings you the most comprehensive and authentic historical content available. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive 20% off their first annual subscription. So what are you waiting for? Sign up at www.historyfix.com and use promo code ADGBERG. That's ADGBURG. Every subscription begins with a 7-day risk-free trial. And after signing up, download the History Fix app on your smartphone. So go to www.historyfix.com and use promo code ADGBERG. That's ADGBURG on an annual subscription. Escape into history with History Fix.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg. The National Association of Civil War Musicians, founded by the Grand Army of the Republic, serves as a beacon for those who cherish the notes that stirred a nation. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, where the scores of the past are preserved and the spirit of camaraderie persists. Immerse yourself in the melodies that played through history. For example, take July 3rd, 1863. As Lee's cannons unleashed a maelstrom, the Philadelphia Brigade Band exemplified valor. Positioned at the heart of the onslaught, their music defied the cacophony of the largest artillery barrage in North American history. Their presence was a deliberate symbol. If the band could stand tall and play, then the infantrymen can lay in wait to hold that crucial ground. Today, we keep this and other memories alive. No matter if you sound the fife, beat the drum, or swell the brass, your contribution breathes life into our mission. Let's commemorate, collaborate, and preserve together. Step forward and join the ranks today. Visit nacwm.org. That's nacwm.org, the National Association of Civil War Musicians, honoring all the brave soldiers who dared to wage a war with only an instrument.
Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum, offering over 1,500 sites and stories for you to explore. Each Civil War Trails site has an interpretive sign to help fuel your imagination as you stand on remote mountaintop artillery positions, in fields where thundering cavalry charges took place, or in now quiet downtowns where raids, riots, or raiders shattered the peace. Over 60 Civil War Trail sites allow you to stand in the footsteps of the Gettysburg campaign across Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and of course, Pennsylvania. In fact, they are expanding further into Pennsylvania now with the latest sites in Wrightsville, Hanover, and Chambersburg. As you travel the trail, you'll find more than just great history. Beyond battlefields, great barbecue, beer, and bourbon await. Here's a pro tip: carry cash and never book your day completely to ensure that you can take that gravel road, explore that hiking trail, or pick up an amazing artifact from that awesome antique shop you find along the way. Request a free brochure shipped right to your door at civilwartrails.org, and be sure to snap a hashtag sign selfie next time you are out exploring. Click the link to Civil War Trails in our show notes. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
The fact of the matter is Grant begins to pull additional troops, and this is where we see the emptying of the northern ring of forts around Washington, D.C. Okay. And it's important to remember, there is a lot of troops around the federal capital. Okay. That's been part of the Lincoln administration's plan to defend Washington since the beginning. Washington, D.C. is the most heavily fortified city on earth by this point. Well over 60 forts surrounding the national capital, 90-some-odd batteries and gun positions. Grant is going to begin to pull the heavy artillery regiments out of Washington. And heavy artillery regiments are big.
Yeah.
I mean, 12 to 15 companies big.
Oh, I didn't realize they were that big.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they are big.
Okay.
Because they're generally broken up into battalions of about five companies.
Okay. And a company would be a battery, essentially?
Right, yeah. Exactly. So the heavies are being pulled out of the northern ring of forts around Washington to reinforce the Army of the Potomac. At the same, not the same time, but just after this happens, and we have this series of bloody fights in the Overland campaign, Lee has to do something to take some of this pressure off of not only Petersburg and Richmond, but also his supply lines, because now things are happening in the Shenandoah Valley. David Hunter has replaced Franz Sigel, and Hunter is going through the valley. He's tearing up the telegraph. He's tearing up the railroads. He's burning things, mostly things tied to Confederate infrastructure, though he will burn the Virginia Military Institute's library, as well as Governor Letcher, who's now a Confederate officer, his mansion. So he's making a nuisance of himself there in the valley, but he's angling for Lynchburg, okay? that important supply route and railroad hub that is feeding Richmond and Petersburg. So Lee has to do something about that. And he's going to break off about a third of his army to do it. Okay. He's going to send the Confederate Second Corps, now under Jubal Early, west. And that's going to begin what's known as the Monocacy Campaign, or the Third Confederate Incursion into the north. And Grant's going to have to react to that as well.
So Lee's still, he's got a dwindling army, and they're fighting these bloody battles.
He's going to be down to around 50,000 troops by the time the Overland campaign ends. Okay.
So he's not taking as many casualties as Grant is.
Right, because he's on the defensive.
But it's still a precarious situation he's in.
Yes.
And yet he sends troops away.
He's got to.
He's got to.
Yep.
He's got to constantly make these ballsy moves.
Right. He's not happy about it, for sure. And yes, there is the discussion of freeing the Confederate POWs at Point Lookout, but nobody, I don't even think Davis thought that was really going to work, because they pull the naval support from it almost immediately, and the whole thing is considered just a let's give it a shot and see if it happens.
Go into what that is. I'm not familiar.
It's the Johnson-Gilmore raid. It's part of the larger incursion into Maryland in 1964. It's the bulk of the cavalry from Early's command is broken off. So he's got 4 brigades of cavalry. 3 of them leave.
Okay.
At the same day the Battle of Monocacy begins, or I shouldn't say begins, is fought. We have 3 brigades of cavalry that are just gone. They sweep well north of Frederick, cross over the Monocacy River, and head east. Now it's Bradley Johnson and Harry Gilmore, so 2 Marylanders, Frederictonian with Bradley Johnson, and Harry Gilmore's from Baltimore. So the 2 best guys to know that region are leading this raid. But the fact of the matter is they're also the best guys for maneuvering Early's forces through central Maryland, and they're gone.
Okay.
The raid gets nowhere close to Point Lookout.
So the idea being that they're going to go and raid the prison at Point Lookout and free the Confederate
12 to 15,000 Confederate prisoners.
Who would probably not be in any fighting shape.
Exactly.
So it would be a waste. Now you just got to feed and take care of these men who have no energy or strength.
No energy, no strength. That's what the naval contingent was supposed to do, is they're going to put them on the boats as opposed to try to march them away. We're going to get them on the ships and run. But the United States government got wind of it very early on, because Richmond, much like Washington, leaks like a sieve.
Yeah.
There's spies everywhere. And so the naval squadron for the Potomac River is increased. So now there's even more gunboats. The garrison at Point Lookout is put on alert. And let's be honest here, some of this is also based in racism, because the garrison is made up primarily of USCT troops. And there's still this idea that, we'll be able to punch through those guys. Bull crap. The one was a veteran regiment. The other one was brand new. So it was great. It was a big regiment. So no, I don't see it happening.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to a complete.
So that's an aside there.
That's an aside.
Okay, but go ahead.
It forces Grant to break off troops from the Army of the Potomac. He's going to send the 6th Corps, eventually in its entirety, up to Washington. And the 19th Corps, which has been redirected from the fighting down in Louisiana, it was supposed to come up to aid the Army of the Potomac or the Army of the James, is basically told at Fortress Monroe, keep going. Keep going. And they go all the way up to Washington as well. So we have these forces that are either with Grant or were coming to Grant, now being shifted to Washington and its defense. Of course, the fighting will occur at Monocacy, delaying Early, and then all of these troops are arriving in Washington as Early is approaching the edges of the District of Columbia. He will not be successful in his raid. He does not break into inner Washington. He is within the boundaries of the District of Columbia, interestingly enough, but he doesn't get further than that, stopped on the very edges. But these troops are going to remain in the north, and it's going to actually pause some of the offensive operations around Richmond and Petersburg, interestingly enough. And so that forces Grant and the commanders on the ground to look at different tactics and more innovative tactics, and suggested to him in mid-June, so about the same time this is all kicking off, the commander of the 48th Pennsylvania wants to dig a hole.
Oh, yes.
Yep. And by July 17th, the mine is dug. And they begin to fill it with 8,000 pounds of black powder.
That's insane.
It is. And Confederate forces aren't stupid. They realize that they're not getting as much action on their front. Something's going on. They began to sink countermines trying to find this thing because there was rumors of digging. They maybe even could hear digging or see some of the waste from the mine itself in some cases.
Interesting.
And they're sinking countermines. They're trying to find it, but they can't find it. And at 4:15, I believe, a.m. on July 30th,
sounds right,
thing goes off. Biggest controlled explosion in United States history at this point, blows a massive, massive hole in the Confederate lines at Petersburg.
How massive are we talking? Do you know?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't want to lie to you.
Go ahead.
So it's a very big hole for the time. It's going to annihilate the Confederate defenders in that part of the line. And the federal troops are ready and waiting to go.
I got to
go for it.
130 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 30 feet deep.
That's a big hole.
That is a big hole. That's according to the American Battlefield Trust there.
Good source. Good source. Now, unfortunately...
But you know what, though, Matt? It only took out 352 Confederates.
Only.
Only.
That's right.
They were killed, though. Those were killed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, when you're dealing with tens of thousands, 352, all that effort, all that powder wasted, and you only take out 352.
True. But it does blow this massive hole in the line, and there's an opportunity. Sadly, that opportunity is not properly exploited, in large part due to fear. Now, what's going to happen is that neither the... Okay, Burnside backed this idea. It's one of his regiments. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it. Very tepid response from Grant and Meade. Mostly, okay, it'll keep the troops busy sort of situation. But then the darn thing works, okay? And what had happened is that the 9th Corps has the largest contingent of USCT in the Army of the Potomac at the time. They wanted to and had trained Ledley's division of the black troops to go in. They were not to go into the hole. They were being trained to go around the hole, to use siege ladders, to use things to help maneuver through this blown to crap landscape and actually punch through. Unfortunately, as we know from the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, Meade and Grant had his concerns about sending in African-American troops, not because they didn't think they could fight, but because of the casualties that they were likely to sustain.
Right.
And what does that look like to the public image?
Sure.
Grant actually, when he testifies, he says, yes, this is the reason we were concerned about it, and I agree. He says, we didn't want to make it look like we were sending in these guys to get slaughtered, but we knew if we sent white troops first, the country has become has become enarmored to the casualties of white troops. Okay? So Grant agrees with the option. Now, the disaster at the disaster at Petersburg at the crater is going to lead to significant losses to the attacking forces. The troops go right into the hole, and when Confederate forces under Mahone counterattack, they catch them in that hole.
Okay.
If you want to see a really good example of the fight in the crater in modern film and stuff like that, the movie Cold Mountain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, they show it as the middle of the morning or middle of the day, but whatever. The fact of the matter is it's at dawn. Okay. It's very early, maybe pre-dawn. They portray it very well. The Confederates look good. The Federals look pretty good. And just the chaos of it. Now they go into some silliness with like throwing
them like
the
spears.
muskets like spears, but the actual explosion and the troops getting caught in there to the point where they basically could not move and it was fish in a barrel time, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to have another.
But wait, so if they were training to not get caught in it,
right?
Why did they go in it?
Because the troops that were training not to get caught were not the ones that were allowed to attack.
Sorry, I missed that part. Yeah.
That's okay. Ledley's division does go in, but the white troops have already gone in. They went right into the hole. Ledley's guys came in behind them, and they tried to start spreading out, but a lot of those USCT troops get caught in the hole as well. We're going to have 8,500 casualties, along with the very deliberate killing, sadly, of USCT troops. The statistics are brutal. As you know, Matt, as most of your listeners know, there's far more men wounded in combat than killed outright. It's usually about 5 to 1, okay? Sometimes as high as 8 to 1. Here, it's almost 1 to 1.
Really?
Almost 1 to 1. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. It's like 1.5 to 1, something like that. It's not quite 2 to 1.
Oof, that's tough.
Yeah. So Grant would actually write to Henry Halleck there in Washington about this. It was the saddest affair I'd witnessed in the war. Such an opportunity for carrying fortifications I have never seen and do not expect again to have. So Grant, though he'd been kind of tepidly supportive of this idea, he has tried mining before, okay? We saw it in Vicksburg, but he really did see this as having a huge potential that was not able to occur. This is going to ruin Burnside's career. He is removed from command. Ledley is censored because he was drinking during the fighting, as was... the other division commander there, he's also drinking, the guy who's in charge of the white troops that went in. Both of them are censored by the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War.
You mean censured.
Censured, thank you.
Don't say that.
Exactly. Good. The Ninth Corps is going to get a new commander. So, yeah, it's even though in 65, when they re-look at this event, they will exonerate Burnside and basically say this is more on Meade and Grant than anybody. It's over. I mean, his career's already gone at this point. Right. So now, due to and of course, the very same day this is occurring, Chambersburg gets burned.
Oh, yes.
So even though we've got the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia essentially on the ropes, they're locked in the siege of Richmond and Petersburg, they're still striking out. They have gotten up towards Washington. And even after being driven back from the very edges of Washington, they've lashed out again, and now they've burned Chambersburg. We've got the disaster at the crater that has occurred. And due to the continued threat in the Shenandoah Valley, the Army of the Potomac resources remain near Harper's Ferry. So the 6th Corps, the 19th Corps elements are going to stay in the valley for a while.
Okay. So the Army of the Potomac's resources are at Harper's Ferry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the 6th Corps.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, the entire 6th Corps is out there.
Yeah.
On August 7th, more resources are sent in the form of Major General Philip Sheridan. Is sent out. He actually goes to Monocacy Junction, where he meets with Grant there and with David Hunter, and they have a little powwow of commanders to determine what's going to happen with Early in the Valley. And Sheridan's going to be given command of all those federal troops in the Shenandoah Valley region. Sheridan is told to run down Early. That is his objective. Much like Meade has been told that Lee is his objective, Sheridan is told that he is to run down Early and secure the Shenandoah Valley, the back door north for this whole war. Mm-hmm. We're going to lock this down once and for all. And Sheridan comes up with an idea. Reduction of property brings prayers for peace more surely and more quickly than does the destruction of human life. Okay, so we're going to have the orders from Grant later on about burning out the valley, so that even a crow flying over it must bring its own provender. We've all heard that. Yeah. But Sheridan's he's already thinking about that, okay? What can we do to really bring the war home? What can we do to make them want to give it up? Now, back on the Petersburg front, we're going to have the battles of Weldon Railroad on August 18th and 19th, and Reams Station on August 25th. They're both good examples of the continuous maneuvers and fighting around the supply lines of Petersburg, but also the toll that this constant fighting and stress of being in a combat situation is doing to the Army of the Potomac, because it is at Reams Station on August 25th that the Second Corps breaks. It's the first time it will in the war. Not being driven back, not falling back, breaks. They lose guns, they lose men, they lose position. And Winfield Scott Hancock is horrified by this. This is his corps, the pride of the Army of the Potomac. What is this war doing to these men and this grinding series of campaigns that they're going through? Now, it would also be during this period, at the end of August of 64, that a name pops up again in history, one that has deep ties to the Army of the Potomac, but one we haven't heard about in a while. Go ahead.
No, not McClellan.
Oh, yes.
Oh, please. Jesus.
On August 31st, George McClellan accepts the Democratic nomination for president. And during this period, Lincoln's last challenger for the Republican ticket, John C. Fremont, another former general of his, would drop out. Now, he's going to drop out of the running on September 17th, and that's going to secure the nomination wholeheartedly for Lincoln. During this period, though, Atlanta has fallen, marking another major win for the Federals, but also, again, for the Lincoln re-election campaign. Okay, basically, once Atlanta goes on September 1st, Fremont's like, I got nothing. He's putting W's in his column, and what can I do? I can kvetch about how the war's going. So I'm
sure he said kvetch.
Exactly right. So he's going to drop out. By the end of September into early October, we're going to have the Battle of Peebles Farm with the U.S. Fifth Corps. Was fought in conjunction with the Battle of Chaffin's Farm and Newmarket Heights. Now, Chaffin's Farm, Newmarket Heights, that's an Army of the James fight, okay? But at the same time those fights are going on north of the James River, Peebles Farm's happening to the south of it. So now in the actual siege situation, we have these two armies operating in conjunction.
Okay.
Chaffin's Farm, Newmarket Heights is going to see some incredible fighting by the USCT under the Army of the James. More Medals of Honor are won by USCT troops there than anywhere else. For the Battle of Peebles Farm, we're going to see both battles proved to be successful in capturing Confederate works and getting the Federals closer to the important supply line of the Boyd and Plank Road. So we're deep into late 64 at this point. We're still fighting, but the wheels are, I shouldn't say the wheels are coming off the Army, but they're really pushing these armies and these troops hard, and things are going to begin to wind down. In fact, the Battle of Boyd and Plank Road, or no, not quite, is coming up, I should say. But some of the positives of the summer of 1864, along with the soldier vote, led to a narrow victory for a new state constitution outlawing slavery in Maryland in that October.
Wow.
Yep, which was voted on October 12th and 13th. And the new constitution goes into effect on November 1st. And then the last significant offensive of 1864 by the Army of the Potomac was the Battle of the Boyd and Plank Road, fought on October 27th to 28th. It's a Union victory over Confederate troops defending the road and at a battle where the Second Corps redeems itself.
Oh, good.
The Second Corps realized what happened there at Reams Station. It actually gets cut off during Boyd and Plank Road, almost surrounded. It's surrounded on three sides, and it doesn't panic. It basically looks at the situation and says, okay, well, we're out of position, but they are too, to have gotten where they're at. And they attack the flanks of the Confederates that have tried to surround them.
Nice, okay.
Switches the situation entirely on them, if to use a modern term, flips the script.
Right.
And Confederate forces withdraw.
Or to use the Michael Scott term, how the turntables have turned.
Yes,
but about Reams Station, though, going back to that, was that more due to exhaustion and depletion or lack of leadership in the Second Corps?
Honestly, I think it has more to do with exhaustion.
Exhaustion.
Yeah. I do think it has more to do with exhaustion.
Because you said something about, you used the word grinding.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that, the constant fight, pick up and move, fight, pick up and move.
Right.
I mean, that's insane.
It is.
It's insane.
Especially for this type of warfare.
Right.
Yep.
I don't care how veteran you are. You're still a human being.
Exactly.
That's exhausting.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Winfield Scott Hancock is still a very competent commander, but he is still hurting from his Gettysburg wounds. And that's really taken a lot of the edge off of him. There's some problems in command for the Second Corps, absolutely, but I think it has more to do with the grind. The fact that they have been the edge of the blade, the tip of the spear for the Army of the Potomac almost this whole time.
Because soldiers can fight well in spite of a lack of leadership or a problem with leadership.
Right.
So you can't blame it all on that. So it has to be exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So moving on.
Right. Exactly. So due to... And I honestly think he wanted to go out on a win, too. Winfield Scott Hancock retires from the Army of the Potomac after the Battle of Boyden-Plank Road. He's still got a role to play. There's a whole operation that he's involved in the Shenandoah Valley later in 65, but he tries to go home at this point. Okay. He will be called back, but he does try to go home. Humphreys, the chief of staff for Meade, is going to take over command of the Second Corps and would remain as commander of the Second Corps. That October momentum carried through to November when Lincoln won re-election on November 8th with a huge support from the armies in the field. The Army of the Potomac was further cheered when news reached them of the fall of Savannah. Before we touch on Savannah, let's talk about the importance of the soldier vote, because we can't overemphasize this. We hear a lot of talk today in our modern America about concerns about the vote and mail-in ballots and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
This was done for the first time in 1864 in mass.
Mail-in ballots.
Mail-in ballots, or where they would have voting representatives go out basically with an armored voting box or a locked voting box to the troops and got their ballots in the field and then had to take it back to be counted.
Wow.
That sort of thing. And both McClellan and Lincoln support this. Guys on both sides of the political aisle support this. Now, granted, both of them thought they were going to get the soldiers' vote.
Sure.
Lincoln turned out to be right.
Right.
He gets the soldiers' vote by a big margin.
But also, how can you oppose that?
Exactly.
These guys are out there fighting this war and they don't get a voice.
Exactly.
You got to be able to. You got to let. So whether you were for it or not, you had to be for it.
Right. Yeah. You couldn't voice your objections too loudly.
And if anything, Lincoln, with the mood of the country, I don't know if they had a finger on the pulse of the army and its mood and what they thought politically. But I would think that McClellan would be like, yeah, let the soldiers vote because they loved him.
Yep, that was exactly his thought.
Yeah, so Lincoln would be the one with something to lose.
Potentially.
Because he's the guy that gets all the crap.
Right. Now, to the Army of the Potomac's credit, they do vote overwhelmingly. Actually, all federal armies vote overwhelmingly for Lincoln. They see him as the guy who's going to finish this thing.
Now, when you say overwhelmingly, do you know like a percentage?
Like
70%?
I would say at least that.
At least that, yeah.
At least.
So we're not talking 51% like we get today.
Right.
We're talking a true overwhelming victory.
And I'm glad you touched on that because Lincoln, his victory is crushing across the board. It's not just the popular vote. The Electoral College victory is huge. It's 212 to 21.
Wow.
McClellan got 3 states.
I was going to say, didn't McClellan only get like a couple of states?
He technically gets 2.5.
Well, wasn't one of them New Jersey?
It is.
Yeah, New Jersey.
New Jersey, Delaware, and Kentucky.
You just can never... They can never get on the right side of things in New Jersey. That's why I had to leave.
My people were all in Kentucky at the time, so...
Well, my people weren't even here, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, with the end of the year, so the Army of the Potomac is basically not going on the offensive after Boyden-Plank Road at the end of October. Okay, they've worn themselves out. They've gained a bunch of the Confederate supply lines. Now it's just time to squeeze and hold on. They are further cheered because they're keeping track of what's going on elsewhere. They're further cheered by the surrender and fall of Savannah on December 22nd, 1864. Of course, Sherman famously writing, "I beg to present as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 guns, plenty of ammunition, and also about 25,000 bales of cotton." Okay, so just a huge haul for the United States forces. I do want to jump right into 1865 because I know that we want to get through all this. But on January 31st, 1865, the House of Representatives will pass the 13th Amendment. So the Senate had passed it in the winter of 64. Now the House is going to finally pass it. That's the famous scenes in the film Lincoln is dealing with primarily. On February 1st, the ratification process is going to begin because now 2/3 majority of the states have to ratify the new amendment. Illinois will be the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment.
Land of Lincoln.
Land of Lincoln, Lincoln zone right there. This amendment is a king's cure for all the evils, is how it was described at the time. This process continued until the required amount of states in December of 1865. So, of course, Lincoln does not live to see the 13th Amendment go into action, but he knows that process is coming. Michigan is very early. I think it's the second or third day of ratification. Pennsylvania is very early as well. So right here, we're going to see it move along fairly quickly. Now, we just talked about the Electoral College vote that's going to occur. That actually was counted on February 12th. At the beginning of February, the armies have begun to stir, leading with the Battle of Hatcher's Run on February 5th and 7th. It's that battle that federal forces once more expand their area of control, this time to the Vaughn Road crossing over Hatcher's Run, and would force Confederates to stretch their ever desperately thin supply lines even further. Okay? By the beginning of March, Lincoln, of course, is inaugurated. March 4th, 1865, the first time the United States government has held an election during wartime, especially one to this scale. The second inaugural is beautiful. It's a short speech, but it is truly one of Lincoln's best.
I'm glad you said that because the Gettysburg Address gets all the attention.
It does.
And it is my favorite speech of all. But it is a beautiful speech, the second inaugural.
It is. And it's held in very high esteem even back in the day because it's the second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address that adorn the walls of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
I was going to read a chunk of it, but it's not a very long speech, so I encourage your listeners to go and read that themselves.
Read one paragraph.
Okay, I'll do the...
But do it like, dramatic interpretation.
I'll do the very last paragraph because I think it's important to the tone that Lincoln is trying to bring into his second
Is it the one
term.
with the orphans and the widows and all that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Okay. Go ahead.
With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Yeah, I love Lincoln. I just whether he meant that or not doesn't matter. That he wrote it and he said it. I'm sure he meant it.
Absolutely.
But politicians, they say things they don't mean all the time.
That's true.
But it's what the country needed to hear. Can you imagine any other nation, and maybe there are some, but that we know of that vanquishes a foe and and its leader has a message like that?
At this time, no. Yeah.
No. It's revenge, and it's like, okay, now that the armies are done, let's slaughter everybody else. Let's hang all their leaders,
Throw them in jail.
Yeah, but this is, all right, like, let's...
He is looking to bring this country back together.
Yeah.
Okay? He never has recognized the Confederacy as its own country. They are wayward sisters. He wants to bring those states back into the fold. And this is going to cause Lincoln some problems in 64 with things like the Wade-Davis bill, some of the early looks at Reconstruction. I didn't want to get into all that because we're talking more on the Army of the Potomac. But he has a lot of resistance to this bringing the country back together as peacefully and quickly as possible within his own party.
And I think that's what makes him a great leader is the human reaction to the 4 years of war that they just went through is F those guys. You know, like make them suffer. You know, I don't want whatever. Something bad, you know, now we want revenge.
Right. And he rejects that.
And he rejects it. And he says, no, we can't be this way. We have to, you know, pull them back in and we have to move on. Otherwise, because if he hadn't, then we never would have progressed as a country. We would have just continued to fall apart. You know, you have to be able to bury the hatchet and move on.
And we're going to touch on that in just a few moments here when we get to the end. Okay. So with Lincoln's inauguration, his overwhelming victory at the polls in November, now he's been inaugurated. The Confederacy knows that it's not going to let up. Okay, there had been real hope in the Confederacy that if a Democratic candidate, specifically George McClellan, could be elected, maybe there could be a negotiated peace, something to take the pressure, an armistice, if you will, anything to stop the fighting for a little while. It's not going to happen. And so the Confederates begin to look at options, and on March 25th saw the last desperate attempt by Confederate forces to break the Petersburg siege. Major General John Brown Gordon is going to attack Fort Stedman with about 10,000 troops. So it's about a quarter of what Lee's got, okay, maybe a little bit less. He's going to attack at around 4:15 a.m., again, another one of these dawn assaults, having cleared many of the obstructions in no man's land under darkness. This is how comfortable the siege lines have gotten between the armies at this point. There are accounts of Gordon's guys going out there, his engineers, and cutting through obstructions like the abattis and unspooling wire and things like that. Again, not barbed wire, but trip lines and things. And the federal pickets yell at them, like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're just getting water. Or they make up excuse or something like that. And they're like, all right. Whatever. Don't
shoot at them.
No. Now, I'm sure there were some that came under fire, but a lot of them, especially right there in this sector in front of Fort Stedman, they're just like, whatever. And so this attack goes off, and they punch right into the 9th Corps' lines at Fort Stedman. Now, they're going to get into the fort. They're going to get into some of the supporting batteries, Matt. But now what?
Right.
Where do they go? What do they do?
Right.
Federal forces are going to be quick to react. They're going to seal the breach, and once reinforcements from the 2nd and 6th Corps arrive, because the 6th Corps has come back from the valley by this point, they are going to counterattack and retake it all by 7:45. Retaking the lost fortification.
7:45 a.m.?
A.m.
So this doesn't last very long.
No, it's not done at all. Catching the retreating Confederates in no man's land as they withdraw is going to cause severe casualties.
For
the Confederates.
The Confederates.
Yeah. Now, let's see. This comes from Brigadier General Hartranft, who leads the counterattack. I saw that the enemy had already commenced to waver and that success was certain. I therefore allowed the line to charge. Besides this, it was doubtful whether I could have communicated with the regiments on the flanks in time to countermand the movement. So the troops that have kind of blocked this breach kind of see that the Confederates, they got nothing left. They don't know where else to go, what else to do, so let's get them. And Hartranft says, yeah, go. You know who's visiting the army at this time?
I'm going to guess Lincoln.
He is.
Okay.
There was a review that had been planned for Lincoln that morning of a division of troops. Now, obviously, the review was canceled, but he goes out to see the battle.
Wow. And
some of the Confederate prisoners, some of the guys who are captured after this, are shocked. Look, there's the friggin' president of the United States.
Right.
And everybody's kind of walking around. By 8 a.m., everybody's kind of like, okay, situation's under control. This has been a massive attack by the Confederates, and they're just, these now Confederate POWs are blown away by how not only the quick federal response, but how nonchalantly they've taken it.
Yeah.
And this particular gentleman goes on to comment to his comrades that we knew that the cause was lost at that point.
Yeah.
If they can react that well, and then it's just like another day at the park.
Right.
Yeah.
It is amazing how the attitude of the Union Army seems to evolves from the beginning of the war to the end of the Union soldiers.
Right.
And I guess the Confederate soldiers as well, probably.
Of course.
But, it's like earlier in the war when passions are high, the fighting as fierce as it gets in many instances, and it doesn't seem to be as nasty as the end of the war.
Agreed.
When the attitude seems to be like, I'm already dead.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess it's like,
Take
you have nothing to lose.
Yep, take them with me.
Yeah. And it's just like, you're so, what's the word? You're just destroyed. You're as a person.
Hardened.
That's the better word, not destroyed. Hardened. Yeah, that you can just, and it's just
callous, if you will.
Yeah, you're more callous. You just accept it. You've accepted it all, right?
Yep.
And it's just like, okay, this is what it is.
This is what it is.
If I die, I die. I don't want to die. Nobody wants to die. Well, few people want to die.
We hope not.
We hope, right? Yes,
Yeah.
but there are people who do, and it's just matter of fact.
Right.
I guess that's the word. And you said nonchalant and everything like that. And and the Union's got the numbers. They finally got their act together. I guess it's easier for a rebel force, in the case of the Confederates, to have more of the oomph in the beginning. And then the Union forces, were reacting to it, and
it's that slow build.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you have to kind of get sick of it, and you're like, all right, this is just getting annoying now. And then you pull your head together.
There's some really good examples of psychological warfare going on during the siege of Petersburg as well that I don't think gets talked about enough. There's some great books on the siege of Petersburg. Last Citadel by Trudeau is fantastic, for example.
Yeah.
But the Army of the Potomac is really able, and to a lesser extent the Army of the James, is really able to bring up its full, not only military might, but logistical might. Because the Army's not going anywhere.
Right.
Okay, they're continuing to dig, they're stretching out, but they're really in the same area. Now, Petersburg is not a true siege in the sense that Petersburg and Richmond are never completely cut off, but it's that constant chewing on the edges of their defensive lines to cut off those supply routes and constantly reducing the number of supply routes and ability for them to get food in most cases. The Army of the Potomac, it's got thousands upon thousands, well over 100,000 between the two armies at this point, men to feed and supply.
Yeah.
And with them sitting there, okay, let's bring up the bakers. Let's bring up the supplies. Confederate troops have accounts of the smell of baking bread wafting into their lines.
That's got to be torture.
If you're on starvation rations, if you're picking through corn from horse dung and things like that just to get some sort of food, and you've now got this fresh bread smell wafting into your lines, wouldn't it be a heck of a lot easier to turn your musket around and walk over?
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of them do.
Yeah.
And a lot of them do. With the Confederate losses at Fort Stedman, the endgame begins. On March 27th to the 28th, Lincoln will meet with Grant, Sherman, and Admiral David Dixon Porter to establish what becomes known as the River Queen Doctrine, basically how we're going to end the war, bring in the former, and hopefully soon to be former Confederates back into the fold. It's also one of my favorite Civil War memes with David Porter just sitting there thinking Navy things, Navy things, Navy things as everybody else is talking. On April 1st, we're going to have the Battle of Five Forks, which succeeded in unhinging the Confederate defenses of Petersburg, making their position no longer tenable. The following day, Richmond would be evacuated and the lines around Petersburg are captured on April 2nd. On April 3rd, 1865, United States forces enter Richmond. At the head of the advance are soldiers of the USCT. The next day, the very next day, April 4th, Abraham Lincoln himself, with just a tiny guard, enters Richmond.
That's another thing I would have loved to have seen.
It's Lincoln, it's Porter, and it's a detachment of naval armsmen that are guarding them. That's it.
That's crazy.
And
when you say detachment, how many are you talking? Like 12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
12 to 20 guys, maybe.
Yeah.
Now, granted, the rest of the Army of the Potomac and Army of James is nearby, but they're not specifically guarding Lincoln.
Right.
So, yeah, he goes into the still smoldering ruins of Richmond. Because remember, Richmond, in an attempt to destroy anything of military value, catches fire.
Yeah.
Tredegar Ironworks explodes.
Yeah.
And he is going, I would argue that Lincoln is our first historical tourist for the Civil War, at least for Richmond, because he wants to see things. Well, he goes to the Confederate White House.
He comes here. He goes down to the forts. He goes down to Petersburg. I mean, yeah, you're right. He's like, yeah, let's go see this. Let's take a tour. Get me a licensed guide.
He goes. Well, he's got the guys themselves. I don't know if he needs the guides yet.
They have a license.
He goes to the Confederate White House. He or those with him would later remark how neat and tidy Jefferson Davis's office was, how it looks like he maybe straightened some things up before he evacuated.
Right. Don't want them to think I'm a slob.
Right. Lincoln sits in Davis's chair and asks for a drink of water. He will receive numerous African Americans that have been freed by the course of the war there in Richmond. He will admonish those who try to basically throw themselves at his feet. You bow to no man. This is classic Lincoln at this point. Now,
man,
on April 6th, we're going to have a series of battles during the retreat. And we're now well into the Appomattox campaign. Confederate forces and those of the United States Cavalry, 2nd Corps and 6th Corps would clash. This becomes known as the Battle of Sailor's Creek. This saw the near complete capture of the Department of Richmond. So basically, the defenders of Richmond were formed up into their own quasi-corps, and it's under Richard Ewell, because we had to pull him out of retirement. Dick Ewell and his command are captured almost en masse. Almost all of them get captured at Sailor's Creek, to the point where we would have Andrew Humphreys of the 2nd Corps commenting on it in his after-action report. Ewell's whole force was lost, together with nearly half of Anderson's, the 4th Corps, and part of Gordon's, all in a useless effort to save the trains. So just trying to save what they can of their supply lines.
Go back to Five Forks for a minute, because there's that whole famous thing with Sheridan and Warren.
Right.
Warren's removed.
Correct.
In your opinion, Matt Borders, is that justified?
I'm sorry, I'm having a deep thought here.
Deep thoughts
with
Matt Borders.
Now, for what Sheridan wanted to do and the pace he wanted to push, I would say yes. In the moment, it was justified. The reasoning for it is not justified. Warren was doing his job. His troops had broken through. He was trying to reorganize them before pushing on. I can't blame him for that. But what Sheridan wanted to do, and in that moment, I can see why he sees that we need to go. We need to keep going.
We need to keep going. You're taking too long. You're out. You in.
Right.
And let's just keep going. To accomplish the ends that I need to accomplish
in this moment.
In this moment, these are the means I'm going to do it by. You're out, and put somebody else in.
Right.
Who does he put in?
Off the top of my head, I can't recall.
Okay, it's not important. All right. So go ahead. I just wanted.
And he's got the cavalry with him. Okay, that's the other thing. He can move fast. He can keep pushing. Much easier than the infantry can. Warren needed to reorganize. They had punched through. They got to get some control of this situation. But Sheridan wants that infantry support. He wants that deeper penetration right now.
Right.
And Warren is not the sort of commander to just do right now off the whim.
Right.
As we know, he's a good commander. He's a very good commander. But it's not what Sheridan wanted and maybe needed in that moment.
Yeah, okay.
So I can't blame him too much.
All right, very good.
Not to split hairs.
No.
Now, with the destruction of Confederate forces, again, a big chunk of it gets gobbled up at Sailor's Creek to the point where Lee himself would actually lament, by God, has the army dissolved, when he sees the losses that he sustained. Now, he is going to have others that would immediately support him, saying, no, sir, here are these men ready to do their duty, that sort of thing. That's Mahone's troops again. And that's going to bolster Lee a little bit. And he basically has those guys hold the defensive line, and then they withdraw once more.
Well, how many are we talking at this point, roughly?
Less than 40,000 troops.
Okay.
The correspondence is going to begin the next day on April 7th between Grant and Lee. This series of letters to the Army commanders trying to really feel each other out and figure out who they are and what they want. Okay? Now, Grant knows that Lee wants to continue the fight, and maybe he's figured out that Lee's trying to get down to North Carolina. But Lee's going the only direction he can go. Grant has outmaneuvered him, in large part because he's got the forces to do it.
Sure.
But he's blocked every road, every route that Lee can go except for west. And I mean, arguably, other than north, that's the only direction Lee doesn't want to go.
Right.
And so he is being driven further westward in attempts to find supplies, attempts to find some route to slip south to the Carolinas. And Grant's just not letting him do it. He's keeping that pressure on this whole time until that is going to lead to Appomattox Courthouse. Now, again, I think most of your listeners are aware, but many folks aren't. There's a fight at Appomattox Courthouse on the morning of the surrender. The morning of April 9th, there's a fight there. John Brown Gordon and his men get into a fight looking for that road out of the area. But Federal cavalry have blocked the route. There's infantry support coming up right behind him, and he basically says, it's done.
Yeah.
I can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, he proposes, and ponders, I should say, because Gordon is aggressive, but he's not suicidal. He says we could do a grand charge, but it's going to annihilate us.
Right. And to what end?
And to what end?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, we have the very poignant and picturesque, if you will, moments of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And this is where we see the best of both Grant and Lee. Lee does two very important things at Appomattox. He surrenders, and he rejects the idea of guerrilla warfare, which is being proposed by some of the more aggressive members of his staff,
right,
including Porter Alexander, actually. But he rejects this idea. He realizes that he has been brought to bear by Grant's forces, that his men are basically shot. They can't do anything more. Grant, to his effort, to his eternal credit, when he hears of the condition of Confederate forces, that they did not get the food at Farmville, Federal cavalry had taken care of that. They can't eat ammunition. They've still got plenty of ammunition, but you can't eat it, of course.
Right, unfortunately.
Grant sends over supplies from the Army of the Potomac to help feed the Confederates.
Yeah.
Just the little things to start this process. Of course, famously, they converse about Mexico and the men they knew together during that war. Grant is somewhat, he's a little bit shy.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not a big public speaker anyways, but he is a little bit, I wouldn't say overwhelmed by Lee, but Lee's got a reputation in the old Army and, of course, in the Civil War by this point. And Grant, he recognizes that he looks a little slobbish. He's been in the field for a while. He's only got his mud-spattered, famously commented mud-spattered private's tunic with his Major General stars sewn into it. But Lee looks awesome. He thinks he's going to be imprisoned, like you were talking about, Matt. He thinks he's going to become a prisoner of the United States, so he's brought out his best uniform. He's looking everything that we think of when we think of the Marble Man. Okay, and then we got Grant, who kind of comes in. And so Grant's feeling a little sheepish about that. They converse about guys they had known before the Mexican-American War. They try to think because Grant knows exactly who he is. He's like, I remember seeing you in Mexico. You were on Scott's staff. It was amazing. And Lee, to his credit, he doesn't try to blow smoke. He says, I've thought of you many times, but I could never put a face to you. He didn't remember him. He was the quartermaster sergeant. He didn't know who that is. Right. And so these two men speak very truthfully to one another about their past experiences and about the situation at hand. The surrender is very magnanimous. And that is not only Grant being a decent human being. That's Lincoln. Because, again, this is part of the River Queen doctrine. Let him up easy. Okay? When that meeting on the River Queen, the ship, had ended, the boat, Grant famously asks, what do you want me to do with him when I catch him? And Lincoln says, let him up easy. And that's what Grant's going to do here. Now, at the end of this, Grant would say, the war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again. April 9th, 1865. What I'd like to do is read a little bit of a slightly longer quote from Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain from April 12th during the actual surrender ceremony. Okay? The surrender documents are signed on the 9th, but there's an actual ceremony for turning over the weapons and the flags and things like that of the Army of Northern Virginia.
And Chamberlain's the one who receives it,
Chamberlain will receive it. That's exactly right. Chamberlain, who almost died in front of Petersburg, but now is a major general. Before us, in proud humiliation, stood the embodiment of manhood, with eyes looking level into ours, waking memories that bound us together as no other bonds. Was not such manhood to be welcomed back into a union so tested and assured? We cannot look into those braved bronze faces and think of hate and personal mean revenge. Whoever had misled these men, we had not. We had led them back home.
It's hard to argue with that.
It is hard to argue with that. Now, Grant,
isn't that the way you'd rather be? You know,
right? And unfortunately, there's a couple of things I want to touch on before we get into this, but there will be elements. There would be a dictated movement within Southern history, specifically with the Lost Cause, to begin to mold the narrative.
Yeah.
And a lot of this magnanimous peace is really played up to the detriment of others.
Yes.
Okay. With the surrender of Lee's army, we would see a domino effect begin with the other Confederate armies. Durham Station is going to occur at the end of April. Joseph Johnston's forces would be surrendered to William Sherman. We're going to see the surrenders in Louisiana occur, and of course, the final surrender is Stan Waddy's forces in Oklahoma in June. In May, though, we're going to have the thing that I think, and I've done a lot of thinking on this recently, because I've had many people over the years, and I think you and I have even talked about this, Matt. What is the thing you'd want to see from the war if you could go back there and not die? What would you want to see? And I think this is what I'd want to see, the Grand Review. Okay, May 23rd and 24th, 1865, we would see on the 23rd the Army of the Potomac lead the way in the grand march down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol towards the White House. They would be received by Grant, by George Gordon Meade, by then President Andrew Johnson, because sadly Lincoln's been assassinated.
Yeah.
This was the pageantry of war, but a deserved victory march for these men.
Right.
Sherman's forces follow the next day. They've got a bit. It's documented that they have a bit of a Western swagger to them. that they haven't been duking it out in the trenches for over a year with Lee's forces. They've been winning victory after victory and forced the capitulation of Atlanta, Savannah, so forth and so on. And so there's a little bit more swagger with the Western boys. But the fact of the matter is, this is the victory parade for the United States, for the Union.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect parade. There's some issues with the United States colored troops not being represented as much as they should have. But the fact of the matter is, this is what they deserve. This is their parade. This is their send-off.
Sure.
Because it's after the Grand Review we're going to start to see the mustering out in mass of these armies. And the Army of the Potomac and the other federal forces will be allowed to go home. Not all of them. I mean, there's still going to be troops.
Keep some.
Yeah, there's still going to be troops in the field well into 66.
During the Grand Review, it couldn't have been the entire armies.
It's most of the Army of the Potomac and a good chunk of the Western armies. But you're right.
So they would have had to, but they still would have had to have left.
Absolutely.
Forces. Yeah.
And there's still armies in the far Western theater and the Trans-Mississippi that aren't able to make it east.
Right.
But with Sherman's troops having come up through the Carolinas and everything, they're very close by.
Right. And Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to kind of wrap it all up and put a pin in this, on June 28th, the Army of the Potomac ceases to exist. And its commander, George Gordon Meade, who has commanded it for the longest chunk of time as the Army of the Potomac, will resign his commission as commander of the Army on June 28th, 1865.
Which is the day he received it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
2 years
in 1863.
Yep.
2 years from the day. To
Yep.
the day.
To the day.
Huh. Do you think he did that on purpose?
I don't know if he did it on purpose. I think he probably realized it pretty quickly and was kind of like, "Oh, that's neat.
Let me do it today."
Today, let's do it today.
Today's the day.
But that has been my whirlwind trip through the history of the Army of the Potomac.
Well,
Matt.
that was fantastic.
Well, thank
In
you,
fact,
sir.
the audience loves it, and they're going to give me a round of applause. I'm going to join them. And next year, we're going to do the Army of Northern Virginia, right?
We'll see. We'll see.
What do you mean we'll see?
Army of Northern Virginia is harder. It's harder.
Well,
its records are not
this
as
isn't
complete.
a comprehensive history, okay? You can do this is an overview. We want people to go out on their own and find out more information. But I'll catch hell from our southern listeners if we don't do the
Well,
A&V.
that's very true. That's why I've tried to give some love as we've gone through this.
But no, there was one thing you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was during the Appomattox, but at some point you mentioned the Fourth Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a Gettys nerd and you don't really step out, you're like, what, Fourth Corps? You don't really step out into the other parts of the war. And this Fourth Corps, what's this Fourth Corps? So I think it's important that we do the Army of Northern Virginia as well. And again, a 30,000-foot view. That's what we do here. We're just trying to wet your whistle and get you to go and do your own research and learn more stuff, okay? All right, Matt, thank you, though. You did a great job this year.
Pleasure,
people
Matt.
loved these Army of the Potomac episodes.
Good.
People love when you come on anyway. Somebody says here, let me see, where is it?
Bringing that nerd back? Great.
Yeah. Somebody said, I love the, here it is, love the Matt and Matt show. So there you go.
Hey.
People love when you come on the show.
I
Rich
appreciate
Snyder
that. Thank you
says,
very
great
much.
show, Matt and Matt. So thank you very much, Matthew. And thanks to Pat for loaning you out from the History Things podcast. And if you guys don't listen to the History Things podcast, you absolutely should. It's a fun show. It's a lot of good history. It's not just Civil War. It's everything.
Yep. Our fifth season is just about to begin, and we are going to be doing a show on the 48th PA. So we touched on them a little bit today, guys, with Battle of the Crater. We're going to be doing a show specifically about
They
them.
get their own show with you guys. Of course, their best show, widely acclaimed, is last year's St. Patrick's Day show.
We do have a lot of comments about that show.
You do. Don't ever have that guy on again. Things like that.
Not too much, though.
Anyway, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Maddie.
Yep, absolutely, Matt. Thank you.
Hey everyone, before you go, I would like to highlight a friend and supporter of the show, The Badge Maker, your source for authentic Civil War Corps badges and more. Purchase handcrafted, historically accurate Civil War Corps badges from all corps. Discover a vast collection of military and civilian insignias of various kinds. Experience the exclusive service of custom hand-stamped reproduction ID discs. At his website, civilwarcorpsbadges.com, The Badge Maker brings history to life with precision and passion. Thanks for listening.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garry, Owen, and glory. Instead of spot